You're looking forward to welcoming your baby, but if you're anything like Jessica, navigating your employer's benefit options can feel like trying to decipher a foreign language, especially if you're not yet ready to spill the beans. Today, we're going to help you and Jessica figure out your maternity leave benefits. Jessica writes, "We just found out I'm pregnant. Amazing news, but also a little overwhelming. It's still early and I haven't told anyone yet at work, including my boss. I'm starting to think about maternity leave, but I don't want to tip off the whole office. That leaves me with a little bit of a dilemma. I'd like to start getting a sense of what my maternity leave options are like. I'm lost in a sea of jargon and feeling like a total newbie. My head and stomach are spinning and I'm not sure where to start. Any advice or resources would be a lifesaver. Thanks in advance." Before we answer Jessica's question, if this is the first time you're here, welcome to the podcast. My name is Brianna, fellow mom and money coach, and here we talk about real money and real life. In today's conversation, we're going to go over a ton of information, so I'm going to stick pretty heavily to my notes so we don't miss anything super important. With that, let's dive into our conversation. Most employers, especially if they're larger companies, are going to have policies and procedures that document what benefits they offer, what qualifications you have to meet to be able to receive those benefits, what documentation is required, as well as how long or how much those benefits are going to provide. Even if you're not quite yet ready to have this conversation with your HR or potentially your boss, at the end of the day, your HR is going to be the best resource for you to be able to define and determine what benefits you specifically qualify for. However, you can do quite a bit of sleuthing if you know where your company's policies and procedures are housed. Before I even became pregnant and knowing that this was something that my husband and I were planning, I took quite a bit of time researching the policies and options that were available to me through my employer so I can make sure that I met any of the requirements. Some employers have a certain hourly requirement that you have to meet within the last 12 months to be able to qualify for benefits. Having all of this information ahead of time can really also help you know what questions to ask HR, especially if they have a lot of employees that they're managing, then really relying on them to provide you with all of the details. Now, the most common benefit that we talk about here in America is the Family and Medical Leave Act, often referred to as FMLA. Now, the big thing to remember with this law and specifically is it does not replace your income, it protects your job. Not all employers qualify for this plan, nor does it cover all employees. There are certain requirements that both the employer has to meet as well as the employee has to meet to be able to receive this benefit. Some of the things, for example, that employers have to meet is they have to have at least 50 employees for this law to apply to them, and some of their employees have to live within a certain mile radius of each other. So make sure that you are aware whether or not your specific employer may meet these requirements to offer this benefit. One of the things that you might have to be aware of on whether or not this law, even if it applies to your employer, it may not apply to you, is by meeting certain work hour thresholds in the past year. So just because you're employed by an employer that may offer this benefit, you as an employee may not have met the requirements to be able to protect your job. What this law does is it allows you to take 12 weeks of unpaid maternity leave, but it does not replace your income. You can start your maternity leave through FMLA and take it in small incremental portions to cover things like prenatal care or doctor's visits, ultrasounds, etc., leading up to your birth. Or if you have a doctor's order or you need to be hospitalized or put on bed rest, you can actually take the entire portion of it before you even give birth. Now, some women prefer to wait to take their FMLA leave until after baby is born, so that way they have the entire portion of time that they can just soak in as much of the baby snuggles as possible. So when you choose to take your FMLA leave will really be dependent on you, but you can start your FMLA leave before baby is born. with certain requirements or possibly restrictions attached to that leave. Some of the requirements for this benefit is that you will have to provide your employer with a doctor's note certifying your FMLA leave for pregnancy-related reasons. Now, you may also qualify for leave beyond 12 weeks. I was actually working remotely for a company that resided in Tennessee, and Tennessee requires employers to provide up to 16 weeks of unpaid leave for pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery. But it only applies to female employees, and it does require a 3-month notice to qualify. So it was pretty disappointing that even though I was an employee and I knew that my other coworkers, when they went on maternity leave, were getting an entire extra month for their maternity leave, yet because I did not reside in Tennessee, that benefit was not extended to me since I resided in a completely different state. So depending on where you live, you might have state benefits available to you based off of your unique state's law. Now, when it comes to paid maternity leave, specifically through your employer, each employer is obviously going to be different, but here are some details you'll want to identify from your employer's policy. The first thing is minimum time worked. Most employers require employees to have been with a company for a minimum period, often 12 months, typically 1,000 to 2,000 hours before qualifying for paid leave. They're also going to determine whether or not you're a full-time or part-time employee. In the US, employers have some flexibility in setting their own internal definition of full-time and part-time employees, specifically when it comes to offering paid maternity or paternity leave. This threshold often falls somewhere between 32 and 40 hours per week, but it can vary since there's no federal requirement to specifically say, okay, if an employee meets this amount of hours, they automatically qualify for this paid leave. Some companies only offer benefits to full-time employees, so make sure you understand what your employer's policy says and how they specifically classify you. Some employers require their employees to be classified as full-time salaried employees versus like contract or temporary or temp to hire to be eligible for paid maternity leave benefits. Another thing to keep in mind when you're looking through your employer's policies and procedures is your notice period. No one wants to be managing a group of employees and then find out only a few days beforehand that their employee is going to be gone for possibly 12 weeks. That's a huge gap to fill. So having that much notice allows your team and your boss to set themselves up for success during your absence. Now, Jessica, I know that this next part specifically won't apply to you since you already told me that you're giving birth, but it may be helpful for other moms listening, and that is to identifying the relationship to the child. Some companies offer leave to both biological and adoptive parents, while others may have different policies for each situation. Moving on to additional items that you will want to identify is the benefit amount. Some companies may offer a percentage of your salary during paid leave, like 60%, while others may provide a flat rate. They could also offer a tiered structure for paid leave. For example, the first 6 weeks might be at 100% of your salary and the remaining 6 weeks at 60%. Or you may have a portion of time where you go unpaid, even though they offer a paid maternity leave option. So figuring out what your company offers is going to really help you financially plan and prepare ahead of time. Now, whether or not your employer provides paid leave, you may have paid leave benefits through your specific state. There's actually 15 US states that offer paid parental leave programs, so check with your state government website to see if you live in a state that offers this benefit. If your employer doesn't offer paid maternity leave, you still might be able to receive some pay during your maternity time off if you qualify for short-term disability. Now, the acronym for this is quite unfortunate, so we're going to stay with the full-length definition of this benefit. Now, this is insurance that may be provided by your employer. It provides a partial income replacement, typically 40 to 70% of your salary, while you're recovering from pregnancy complications and or childbirth. It does typically last 6 to 8 weeks, but it could be longer if you end up needing to have a C-section, but this is going to vary via policy. Just like every insurance is a little bit different. Like if you think about what you look for your automobile, it's different across different policy providers. The same thing is of course going to apply to short-term disability. Even though some employers offer short-term disability insurance directly through them, you could also purchase short-term disability policy independently. So consider factors like cost, coverage, and pre-existing condition exclusions before buying a policy on your own. Since short-term disability is an insurance, you will have to file a claim to receive this benefit. Some plans allow you to file a claim before your due date, allowing you to receive some income replacement for pregnancy complications or for doctor-ordered bed rest before childbirth. Again, that's going to be completely dependent on your policy, so you'll want to make sure you review your policy documents and define what the exclusions as well as the requirements are for your specific policy situation. Some typical standard requirements that you'll see when it comes to short-term disability is a doctor's certification confirming your pregnancy and anticipated delivery date. And then after baby is born, you'll need to provide your doctor's documentation again, stating you're unable to work while you recover. With short-term disability, there's often a waiting period that's typically 7 to 14 days. Again, this can vary via policy before your benefits actually kick in. Now, some employers may coordinate short-term disability benefits with their employer-provided maternity leave to ensure you receive some income throughout your entire leave period, but that may not be the case. So it's really important that you understand each of the individual policies and procedures, because it may not be explicitly stated, and it may be a question that you want to clarify with your HR department after you've gathered the necessary information to have a more educated conversation with them when you are actually ready to tell. One big consideration that is often overlooked is repaying leave if you don't return to work. Many companies have a requirement to return to work for a certain period, for example, maybe 30 days after your leave actually ends. This was a huge thing that I identified after I looked through my own company's policies and procedures when I was doing my, initial sleuthing before preparing for my maternity leave. Finding out that if I didn't return to work, which I was completely planning to, but seeing in writing that if I didn't return, then I would have to pay back the full portion of paid maternity leave that I had received was a big help, and it helped me to go into my maternity leave with certain expectations, knowing that if something came up, that I had to return to my job regardless, because I knew I was not going to be able to afford to repay that maternity leave that I was receiving during my time off. Some companies may have formal contracts or agreements stating repayment terms if you don't fulfill your return to work requirements. But I am not looking at your employer's specific policies and procedures, and I'm just giving general advice. Make sure you confirm this with your HR department and your benefits provider so you know specifically for your situation if you don't return to work. Now, wherever you live and whichever state you reside on, you may have additional laws regarding paid maternity leave and whether or not you have to repay that if you decide not to return to work. And you can research your own state's laws for more information. Jessica, I know that this was a ton of information to go over and it can seem really overwhelming, but if you're still feeling overwhelmed and want more guidance to financially prepare for maternity leave, you can find more resources in the description of this video. If you're not ready to tell your boss or your coworkers that you're expecting, you might want to try and hide a little bit of that morning sickness, which is why you'll want to watch this video next, because in it I talk about our top tips for me and a few other moms and the things that we did to help manage our own nausea during the first trimester. So hopefully I'll hang out with you more in that video next. Until then, take what's helpful, leave the rest, or modify it to help you best and create your own heart home.